Behind this door is another dimension. Welcome to Enter the Flozone podcast. This is the only podcast that teaches people the secrets of peak performance, positive psychology, and mindset mastery to help unlock your flow state. Here's your host, certified flow coach and international happiness consultant, Sumed Chatterjee.
Welcome back to Enter the Flozone podcast. As always, if you're new here to this podcast, make sure that you leave us a review on Apple Podcast and check out the rest of the episodes as well. And definitely check out my book, TPM, The Astroplasticity Method. Also, I've got this awesome event coming up really shortly at the end of this month. It's with my mentor and one of my best friends, AZD, as well as Ivan. And we're calling it Writing Reality. So it's on the 23rd to the 25th of this month, July 2021. In case you're listening much later, you can still get access to the recordings if you don't attend live. So it's 3 days. Day one is going to be all about, the past. Day two is going to be all about dealing with the present. And day three is where we're setting up your ideal archetype for the future. So we're basically going to be quantum jumping, you could say quantum hopping into that reality. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Today, we have an incredible interview mapped out for you guys with an amazing guest. I've, noticed her content for a while now, and it's very intricate. It's very heartwarming. It's a pleasant vibe. And so today we have Flavia Zenari. The word Zen is in her name, intuitive poet, and very recently published author of Letters from Love. She's a cosmic detective. She's tapped in, and we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting things today. How are you doing, Flavia?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So give the audience here a little bit of a brief about you, where you're from, what you're all about, and how you personally get into the state of flow.
Okay, cool. So yeah, my name's Flavia and I'm a writer and poet, and I'm based here on the Gold Coast in Australia, a really beautiful spot. Very lucky to be living here. So I've been writing on and off for about 7 years, and it is something that I found that just really connected me to my emotions, connected me to source, connected me to the divine energy that I could tap into, and was able to share that through my writing. And it's been something that has been such an incredible journey, just seeing how it's allowed me to really express myself, but also connect with other people too. So everything I've written has not only, come from my heart space, but it seemed to connect with other people and connected with their heart spaces as well. And I've just recently written a poetry book, my first poetry book, Letters from Love, which is, pretty much about connecting to that heart space and getting people to, remember that within our core, we are love. That is essentially what we are. And with how I get into my flow is definitely connected with my writing. So it seems to be something that's always connected me to this flow state, is being able to just silence the mind and connect to this creative energy. I feel like the creative energy is the energy of source, is the energy of the divine, whatever you want to call it. It has many names, but that creative flow is something that, if you tap into that space, you're coming from like a really pure space where you don't have the chatters of the mind. You don't have the distractions of the material physical world. You can just kind of allow that flow state to come through to you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was just thinking that when you said the word pure, that's kind of how I would describe like your artistry and your style, is like there's this kind of like a layer of tenderness to it. And brought up that heart space because that's the most tender space, right? It's like we need to be able to get rid of these like heart walls to be able to actually get to that core essence of who we are, right? So yeah, that's
Definitely.
one. So you mentioned going on and off 7 years. Could you remember back to a time when you were perhaps younger where you started to get a knack for writing, or maybe if you can astral project to that time and see?
All right, let me get back into it. You know what? Honestly, the moment where I really began to write was actually a little bit later. So it was about 21 when I started to really focus on my writing. I mean, as a child, it was the way that I could express the best. So as a child, it was really difficult for me to express emotions. So if I would have an argument with my mum, I remember I would go into my room and write a note apologizing to her and quickly slip it to her and run away, because I was much more comfortable with expression through words on paper rather than speaking with another person. And, even being here today, having worked on my, vocal communication has been a massive journey, because I always felt comfort and I always felt that ease in my ability to express through writing. But it really sort of started to have a massive impact when I was about 21, and I was doing a lot of self-development work, and I really wanted to step outside of the person that I was, and I wanted to develop myself. At the time, I had been suffering a lot with anxiety and depression throughout pretty much my whole life. So I needed something to help me on that journey. And I sort of fell into writing, where I just began to write what I would call self-development articles of things that I would just sit and reflect upon and say, oh, hey, this actually really helped me. And I remember just sitting there on my laptop, typing up the first article and going, you know what? I think I might share this. I think I might create a blog. So I ended up starting to share that sort of writing on my blog. It was more so just teachings, everyday teachings or reflections that I uncovered in my day-to-day life, which sort of lifted me from this space of anxiety, of depression, into a space of greater understanding. And it was something that really helped me move through that time of my life, especially. And I remember one of the articles that I had posted, I decided to do something a little bit different, and I sort of threw in a different layout, and I started to play with words a little bit more, and I started to tap into this different energy. And it was like this really, this real flow, this real creativity. And that's when my poetry started to come about. Never in my entire life would I have ever thought I'd be one to write poetry or to, I was very much a writer, but in the ways of, report writing, more structured things. So this was just a completely different side of things. So tapping into that energy, I actually felt so much joy from it. And it was the joy that allowed me to continue to write poetry. And it's interesting because my first styles of poetry were more, I guess, let's just say a lot of people thought I was on psychedelics writing some of the stuff I wrote. But this was just sort of the natural flow of things. This is just how my mind, how I was able to tap into these other sorts of like really creative, alternative ways of thinking. And it would come through in a real visual sense through my words and my poetry. So yeah, I began sharing the poetry as well as the self-development style writing. And it was on and off, because through the years I went to university, I studied anthropology, I studied social change and development. So I studied things that sort of were more, I guess, structured in a way. And I had focused so much energy on those pursuits that the writing was always something I just did on the side, until about a year or so ago when I thought, you know what, I'm really going to invest some energy into this and see where it takes me. And then I got a really strong message about December of last year that said, just this really strong intuitive message that said, you have no choice anymore. Now's your time. You need to pursue
Yeah.
this with your whole heart and soul. And you need to just follow this path. So yeah, I've taken the leap and I'm fully flowing with it now.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. In the flow state, whereas athletes would have a very physical risk, right? Like if they can get injured, artists
Mm-hmm.
and your poets, they have much more of a emotional or creative risk that they're taking by actually sharing
Definitely.
heart, right? And so, tapping into that vulnerability, I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people definitely struggle with. I know that, I've also similarly been on um, like I've had anxiety and depression in my life, and I've used, I guess, the flow state to combat that energy, right? Because what
Mm-hmm.
anxiety basically is like you're like teleporting to the past and the future, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
now. It's almost
Yeah.
like you have this excess mental energy. But from what I'm hearing from you, it's like that was a creative outlet for you, and you could actually write about it, and it would be this flush, but at the same time, it would get people to resonate with that because it was your story, it was your words, it was your expression.
Mm-hmm.
And also, similarly, what I'm hearing is like you had this past of structure or discipline of like, academic writing, but then finally finding that flow or that letting go got you to get into that zone with your poetry. So that's really interesting because surrender and structure kind of create that flow state, right? We can't have one and not the other. So it's like, even when I was studying, I think it was like surrealism or something like that in college, uh,
Mm-hmm.
poetry class, and I never thought I'd write poetry. I mean, I was always rapping and things like that. I was creating like hip hop, but that's very different from writing poetry in a sense. I mean, rap is rhythm and poetry if you break down the acronym, right? However,
Yeah.
like as I started to explore these different ideas, there was this style of poetry called Oulipo, which was a French style of poetry where you could where you had to use constraints, so like creative constraints, so you could only go to this one page in the magazine and only use those words, for instance. So it was like creating the limit or the boundary, but still within that boundary there was freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a really interesting way to dive into that. But let me know your creative process or how that looks like in terms of, let's say you mentioned tapping into your emotions, and a lot of different people have different creative processes, but what is your process personally, and how does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So I'd say with the creative process that I go through, definitely is very random. Let's just say that. But at the same time, nothing is random. So usually the time of day is something that gets me into a certain state. So I've noticed quite often the first thing as I wake up, I'll have these incredible philosophical ideas and thoughts and moments of realization that it's 6:30 in the morning, and I roll over to my phone and I just start typing out. There was a stage that every single post that I was making was made as soon as I had woken up, and people were like, wow, that's amazing, you're turning up every day, you're posting every day. And I'm like, I'm literally waking up and getting into that state, because I think our minds don't have time to wander off anywhere else. And there's more of this clarity first thing as you wake up. So that's something that I found, if I just allowed myself to really just focus and say, I'm going to connect with this creative state, I'm going to connect with this energy, then it'll just come through a lot easier at that time of day. Also, I found most definitely nature is the, oh gosh, like it's the most incredible thing, an incredible way to connect to creativity. If I feel in any sort of funk, or I feel I'm not really in a state of flow, I'll just often go for a walk, go to nature, sit down, meditate, do something to bring myself back to the presence of now. And that will connect me often to this, to this other realm, almost this creative realm, which I don't see it really existing in the 3D world. I see it as though there's just this, there's like this energetic space, there's this energetic realm that exists that is full of creative ideas. And, you know, we can enter that state and pluck those ideas. And everybody has access to that. That's the incredible thing. It's just a matter of being able to allow yourself to get to that state. Because when we're children, for example, do you think how many children just creatively express themselves, create magic stories, imaginary friends, you know, so easily can we tap into that space of creation as a child? And as we get older, because of the density of the 3D material reality, we're often pulled towards that. Our energy is pulled towards that. So we're not able to give ourselves the space to tap into that creative realm, that creative field. So by giving yourself that space through meditation, through nature, through, first thing as you wake up, when you have no distractions, nothing on your mind, you can give yourself that space and that time to tap into that realm of creation. And the most amazing thing about it is it's just infinite. There's so much that exists there. And we definitely all have access to it, for sure.
Absolutely. And it's also like one of the ways to manifest, right? When we're using both our
Mm.
minds together and we get that synergy. Absolutely. Like I really agree with that idea of the whole idea of morning pages, right? And
Mm.
Julia Cameron talks about that as well in her book, The Artist's Way, where, you know, if you wake up in the morning and you just start writing, your subconscious mind is going to be the most activated, right? Because you've gone from that dream realm, that almost that alpha theta flow state, you know, where you're like going into that space where it's like, you know, all the thoughts are just coming out, right? There's no sense of a filter or like, oh, I must be doing it this way, or, you know, I must be accurately describing my journey. Like it's just
Yeah.
pure, it's like going. And yeah, I think Elizabeth Gilbert also talks about that in her book, Big Magic, of what she says is there's like a space of these infinite ideas, right, floating around in this space. And we as artists or creators, we can take one of these ideas and pull from it, and if we don't pull it in time, there's somebody else that's going to take that idea. So it feels like this sense of urgency, right, of like, oh, okay, I'm just materializing it, but it's not really mine, right?
Mm.
I'm just like the person who is, you could say, I'm the surrogate, right? I'm the one who's like
Mm.
this information right now, and hopefully it's going to inspire somebody else to also tap into that frequency. So what do you have to say about that?
I definitely agree with that. And it's interesting because, you know, I've noticed at certain times when I've had a particular idea of something to create in the physical reality, and then I'll notice if I don't pick up that idea, all of a sudden within a couple of months I'm seeing it in the physical reality, and I'm going, hold on, that was the idea I had. You know,
As
it
well.
happens.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So in terms of creativity, you know, it's a flow trigger by itself, which is so interesting to me. Like there's psychological triggers, there's emotional triggers, there's group flow, you know, all this kind of stuff. But creativity is one of those things that's like more creativity creates more flow, and more flow creates more creativity. So it's the speed.
Exactly.
So in terms of creativity, how would you define creativity in terms of your personal definition, how you would assess your own creativity, or how you would be able to see, okay, this is a work that I really vibe with, or something along those lines. Like, what is your personal metric for creativity?
Mm. So I think often what happens is people have this notion or this idea of creativity, and they think, artwork, poetry, all the traditional styles of creativity. But I've seen someone, for example, like my mother, who isn't necessarily, she never worked in any sort of creative field, but her as a person was just such a creative person always. And I see that creativity is more so in the way you view the world, in the way that you tackle problems, the way you problem solve. It's being able to see the world through a certain lens, which is, you've got the box of structure, the box of thought, and then creativity is kind of stepping on top of that box and looking outward and seeing, the magical colors and the magical textures and experiences outside of that box. And you think to yourself, oh, wow, this is incredible. And then you start, playing with those textures and colors and incorporating them into your everyday life. So it's not necessarily just to do with the arts per se, but more so to do with how you interact with life in general. Like every day can be a creative adventure if you really want it to be. How you see your conversations with people, how you dress yourself for the day, how you even eat your breakfast. You might be eating oats, but you're decorating your oats and you're making them look beautiful and you're adding flair and creativity into that process. So it can really just be a way of living. It's really living in that state of constant flow, in that state of constant creation, just creating things in whatever way that you can, whether it is through the traditional methods of like painting and writing and singing, or whether it is just creativity in, your 9 to 5 job in an office and you're adding your little flares, your little touches to what you're doing. It can really be incorporated, I think, in any way. And it's something that seems to really just brighten and lift things as well. And I really believe, creativity is something that makes being human so special, because it's something we have as humans that, other animals or species don't have. They don't have this ability to express through a, creative field. And having that ability, I think it's just incredible. It can help us in so many ways. I know so many people, myself as well, who musicians and music has touched them so much that, it's been the difference between, something really quite horrible happening and something, really amazing happening because of that inspiration from the music or the song that's been written. And I just really urge everyone to offer their creative gifts to the world, even if it's not something that other people think is incredible. It doesn't have to be this massive thing, but if you're just offering your creativity in your day-to-day life, I'm sure many people will appreciate that and feel the energy behind what's being offered as well.
Definitely. I like the fact that you mentioned problem solving, because like for a lot of people, they find that, through their problems, they get so wrapped up in their storylines of like how it's supposed to look or how it's supposed to be or how it should be. But that's, again, that's the societal constraints, right? That's not really our true magic self, like you were saying. So in the sense of inspiration, it's so interesting. I love like word etymologies. Like being a rapper, I look up like word etymologies and things like that. And the word inspire actually means in spirit. So
Mm.
it's just such a confirmation, you could say, in terms of how there is this brightness and lightness towards it, right? I think that when people talk about like high vibration, low vibrational energy and things like this, I think one way to describe it is like one is very heavy and one is very light.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of one of the ways that I've begun to simplify it, as well as creativity being this ability to see from a different perspective. It's like seeing from a fresh pair of eyes rather than conditioned eyes.
Mm.
It's like being able to see things from different angles. I constantly see like these black kites here. They're like in the hawk or the eagle family, right? Here in India. And whenever I go through like an epiphany or a breakthrough, they always like fly over my balcony, or like here I'm on this high-rise apartment. They always like fly near me. They'll land on my windowsill and things like that. And like how I see that and how I perceive that changes that transition phase of I'm like, oh, I'm about to go on a breakthrough. And these birds, to me, they represent like higher perspective or like bird's eye view.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see these birds, I always get inspired by them because it's like, wow, this is nature, right? Like speaking through this bird to me in some way, and it's reminding me of something. So have you ever noticed like synchronicities like this with your own work or being in nature? I'm sure you're very tapped in and you're seeing lots of these confirmations that you're on this path. Could you share some of those for the audience that might be interesting?
Definitely. There gets to stages of my life where it's just confirmation after confirmation after confirmation. You know, the classic one obviously is checking your phone or getting a message or receiving something and it's 1111, 222, 333. So those ones have been coming through really strongly, but definitely messages from animals and insects. They'll come through quite frequently and in ways that, you know, it's either guiding me towards something or away from something. For example, during the book writing process, something I was being guided away from was a particular printing company that I was going to move ahead with. And my fire alarms in my house just were going off nonstop. And I couldn't get them to stop. And I just thought to myself, what does this mean? And then at the time I went to work where I was working and the fire alarms were going off there as well. And I thought, okay, these are two very clear signs that it's a warning sign. You know, you think of alarm, you think warning sign. So those were two signs that I said to myself, okay, what's not right? What's happening at the moment that I need to reconsider, that I need to change? And it just so happened that, yeah, at that time, it was, you know, something that I was going to commit to in terms of the printing of my book, which I needed to step away from and find something else. And through that, I learned a big lesson. And from that redirection as well, it allowed me to gain momentum on a path that was in that flow again. And I saw that through confirmations of definitely butterflies. The cover of my book is a butterfly. I was walking, when I decided on the cover of my book, I was walking down the street and I looked down in front of me and there's a butterfly in perfect condition, it had obviously just passed and it was just sitting right in front of me. And I bent down and picked it up and now I've got it sitting in my apartment as a reminder of confirmations and synchronicities of there reminding us when we're on that path, when we're in that state of flow that we'll be given signs. And that I thought was something really special because I've never seen an entire butterfly just sitting in the middle of a path, a busy pathway as well. Plenty of people were walking past, and I just happened to look down and spot it in the moment that it was there. So that was very special.
Wow, that's an incredible synchronicity, absolutely. And specifically
Mm.
the butterfly representing that sense of transformation, right? And you have been on this like spiritual development, personal development journey. So it's
Mhm.
an interesting reminder of that. And the word trans means to go beyond, so transform actually means to go beyond form, right?
Mm.
It's such an interesting, that's a reminder for me to record a video. So basically, it's so interesting that we get these little synchronicities and different things coming up along the path as reminders, as like these sort of signposts or guidelines for us that get us more closer towards that ideal life, right? So yeah, very fascinating stuff. So my next question is around the idea of intuition. For people who want to tap into their greater intuition, what are a few ways that you would recommend to them, specifically at a time where we're all so panicked and things like that? And, there is this kind of looming nature of something that people aren't really aware of, or they maybe have just isolated away from that, or not really engaging with any of the world right now. So in a sense, my question is, how can they get more into that, 5D energy from that, the three-dimensional illusion that people are sort of trapped in a sense?
That's a really good question. That's actually, it's interesting because during this whole world situation that's happening right now, at the beginning, the place that I was in, I was actually consumed by a lot of the fear. The situation that I was in, the particular person that I was dating at the time had a certain view on things, and I guess I was influenced quite greatly about, his beliefs on things. However, what I noticed through that journey moving from fear to now the place that I'm in now, which are completely different spaces, is the greatest thing that I consistently had to ask myself is, where is this thought, where is this feeling coming from? Is this coming from a space of fear, or is this coming from a space of love? So in each moment, I'd ask myself, is this fear or is this love speaking? And each time fear would speak, I would say, okay, thank you. Recognize it for what it was. Fear is our survival mechanism. It's the way of enabling us to, get out of dangerous situations and wanting our human to stay alive, which is totally valid. And I mean, I don't think many people want to die. So
Wanting our
does
human.
that make sense?
That's a quotable. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I would recognize that and I would say, okay, thank you, fear, for trying to keep me alive, but I have a higher knowing. I have a higher knowing of love. And then I would ask myself, okay, in this situation, what is the answer through love? And often when we view things through the lens of love and through the lens of this higher knowing, things that once we were really quite fearful of drop away because we're no longer consumed by this fight or flight mechanism that we're trying to, hold on to this idea of our finite human self, but rather looking at ourselves as, these infinite souls. What is this situation not only teaching myself as a soul? How can I rise above this and learn a greater lesson through this, through a soul space, but also as a collective, as a whole, viewing this whole situation as, what is this actually teaching the human race? What good is actually coming from this? That's allowing people to, raise their consciousness above what's happening. And I see it a lot. I see a lot of people slowly understanding and dismantling certain structures and certain ideas of structures that have existed for a very long time. And they're starting to question and say, hold on, this isn't working anymore. I'm not agreeing with what's happening anymore. And through questioning, it's this openness. You're questioning your survivalist brain and you're saying, oh, okay, well, why are you doing that? For my survival? Well, is there something else? And there is something else. There is that knowledge of, love. There is that knowledge of our higher selves, our higher perspective, where we can see, like you said, from an eagle's point of view, you can see things from above rather than being consumed and pulled down into the third dimensional chaos. But don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not an expert in this area, because like anyone, we are human and we feel these emotions. It's definitely okay to feel the fear and to feel the anger, feel the frustration, feel the, the chaos that's occurring around us. But allowing yourself to feel that, but not allowing yourself to identify with that and say that I am that, I am a part of that, but rather take yourself from that higher perspective and view it for what it is.
Right.
View it for, yeah, view it for what it is.
Definitely. And I think that, certain emotions, you could say they're lower vibration or whatever, right? You could say that okay, there's anger, there's fear, there's, all these different frustration, like these different emotions. However, again, like, yeah, emotions are energy in motion. And if we start to resist those emotions, they're going to become repression, not expression, right? And I think the whole point of poetry is that expression. It's like that ability to take that anger and, transform it into lust, or take that, fear and transform it into love, or take, and this idea of just being able to transmute, like from one emotional state to another. Like one question that I tell myself when I'm feeling like anxious or out of it, I'm like, what's beautiful about this anxiety? And that sort of softens me more, and I start to look for more opportunities there, rather than like, how we feel closed off sometimes when we're like really in our heads. So that actually opens up my heart space, and then I'm able to have it flow through me much clearer with that questioning. So yeah, I think
That reminds me of something that I heard recently, which was about asking yourself empowering questions. So questions that uplift you rather than, we tend to ask questions in the negative. Why am I angry? Why am I feeling anxiety? Rather than, like you said, what is beautiful about this? And I think, even just that small change can make the biggest difference, especially if we're feeling a lot of stress or anxiety with what's happening at the moment. Just start asking those empowering questions and seeing how that shifts on a day-to-day basis.
yeah. And I like the fact that, you're mentioning this idea of love, because I think a lot of media kind of portrays it in a very specific way, like Hallmark cards or Disney or like these kinds of things. So I think once people find their own definition and they create like a relationship belief system, like I had this idea that, oh, there was only one soulmate, and then once I started to understand that, that doesn't have to be my idea, right? That's just an idea that was conditioned into me, right? And so like I think love is the ultimate flow state, because like time stops for you. We often overlook people's flaws if we're in love with them. Similarly, if we have that self-love, we often overlook our flaws. Sometimes we like, we go more towards that loving side, or that tender, caring side of ourselves. So really that understanding the whole, love languages thing, not only applying it towards a relationship, but applying it towards ourselves. I think that's a really important step. Yeah, you were going to say.
Yeah, definitely. Just in terms of that idea of love and how love is so misunderstood, I think, by so many people. And even, having written the book that I have in the title, Letters from Love, a lot of people have assumed that it's more of the romantic sense of love. And love really is what I believe to be the core essence of who we are. When all layers are stripped bare and there's nothing left, there is that pure energy of love. There's that pure energy within us. And love in the romantic sense has been twisted a lot to include a lot of negative connotations. You know, people associated with heartbreak, or, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, I'm never going to love again, things like this. But it's actually not love that's responsible for those things. That's actually hurts caused through the ego. And that's hurts caused through, you know, traumas or triggers that exist in the person. And it's actually the love is the thing that heals it. Love is the thing that will transmute it. Because that, like you said previously, yeah, transmutation, we are our own alchemists. We are alchemists. So we're able to transform so many emotions, and with the tool, with the help of that energy of love, that purity of love, we can really use so many emotions and transform them into that energy.
All right, I'm gonna pause for a second. I'm just gonna let someone into the door, and then we can.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. All right. So I just had my passport renewed, and so I have a new passport. So awesome.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so yeah, we were talking about the idea of love, and I wanted to, bring up this idea of, how we talk about like codependence and independence and these concepts when it comes to relationships. Um, in terms of the ideal form of a healthy relationship, I would say it's interdependence. So this kind of like 1 + 1 = 11 mix of like, right, of like two whole people coming together rather than, this is my other half, or like I have to fill this void with this other person there. So for people who are maybe struggling in their own relationships, or maybe even in that self-relation, right? Because all relation is self-relation in a sense. I almost see it as levels, but how would you describe this idea? Because I think that people go through codependence, then into an independence, like, no, I don't want that, I want to do my own thing, and then they get to that synergy. But what is your perspective around that?
Definitely. I think everybody's experiences are quite different, and I think it depends upon, you know, a lot has to do with our childhoods and our attachment styles and how we've interacted with, you know, our parents and the figures in our life, you know, whether we've had two parents who have stayed together, divorced, you know, one parent has left us, you know, all these different circumstances deeply affect how we then interact with, you know, partnerships, whether that's romantic relationships or friendships in our lives. It has such a huge impact. But the greatest thing is we can, yeah, recognize where you're at individually, because everybody's going to be at a different stage in their life. I know I've been through the ring with codependency and have been in a very codependent relationship. And from that, I learned a great deal because, yeah, codependency has a lot of traits of, you know, a toxic relationship. And you'll often find certain signs in that relationship that you'll be able to, you know, recognize within yourself, you know, not being able to have an identity separate from the person, relying on the other person for your happiness, relying on the other person for, you know, day-to-day tasks and doing things. And then, yeah, like you said, some people are in that phase of independence where they're like, no, I don't need anyone. I can do this all on my own. It is actually something I think, you know, it's a necessary part of our experience, whether we experience that as adults, as teenagers. Some people even experience that as children, you know, the defiant stage of, I can do this on my own. And then we get to a point in our lives where we actually move from the independence into a state of wholeness within ourselves. So it's not necessarily, I don't need you, but it's, I have it all within me. However, I am inviting you into my life so we can co-create something. And I think that's the big difference. And getting to a space where you're saying, I'm whole, I'm complete, I'm fulfilled, I have these things within myself, is a lot of work. You don't just wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm fulfilled, I feel amazing now. It takes a whole heap of work. And it's taken me years to get to this point where I wake up in the mornings and I'm smiling ear to ear because I'm waking up with myself,
Mm.
dancing in the kitchen, cooking dinner, having parties on my own, that real space of like full fulfillment. And it's not necessarily this, traditional idea of, self-love. It has definitely incorporates self-love, but it's much more than that. It's self-acceptance more than anything. It's fully saying each and every aspect of myself, I fully accept,
Yeah.
from the most darkest shadow aspects, which we all have, to the most amazing gifts that we have to offer the world. It's saying like, I am in fullness, self-acceptance, and that sense of fullness. And reaching that place is the most incredible feeling in the world. And honestly, if people, that are listening can reach that space for themselves, I really do believe any relationship or any interaction that they have with people will be from a place of value adding to them,
Right.
rather than I'm missing a piece of myself. Can you give me a piece so I can fill in the blank? The value adding is actually, it's so much more powerful too, because from that space of value adding, you can uplift one another, and you can actually start to create things which are quite powerful and quite beautiful, rather than from a place of like constantly having to fill each other's gaps, because
Yeah.
you're always at that base level at a bit of a deficit. Whereas two full people, whether that's in a relationship or a friendship or any sort of relationship, come together and they're full. What happens from there? You just start building on top of that. And it's a creation process on top of that.
Yeah, it's like, how do we make these, big cities work? It's like everyone has their own skill set that they bring to the table. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they're like specialized in one area. And so if you have a specialist in one area, a specialist in another area, you're just going to make that wholeness work a lot better. But in the sense of like, they are whole beings, they don't need that other specialist. However, this
Mm-hmm.
it's like that synergy of like two minds are better than one, as we say, is like so powerful in that we can manifest faster with other people and with an open heart, rather than
Mm-hmm.
being like, it's all about me, right? And that mentality. And I've been there before, but just understanding that is very powerful and empowering. I like the fact that you brought up attachment styles, because not a lot of people, I mean, they have explored it, they sort of know about it, but I think it's a very big element towards how
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and how we treat others in a relationship. And I recently came to this understanding. I was doing a program called Intentional Impact. It was like basically it's about creating your business and like really optimizing your business. It's also men's work and combined with that aspect. And we were exploring attachment styles, and I started to understand that, man, this thing is not only for relationships. Like, I'm seeing this pattern in my health, in my business, and in all these other areas where it's just like this ripple effect. And once you become more conscious of it and what you need, like for instance, I have a fearful avoidant attachment style. And what
Mm-hmm.
they need specifically is to get to that vulnerability and to have a clean communication line with themselves and with other people. So once I'm aware of that, I know that, okay, this is my level up in terms of my personal growth, right? Once I can be and sit with that and be able to communicate clearly with people, it's going to expand my relationship, right? So, yeah, definitely empowering.
Communication in general is something that within the past few years I've just noticed to be the number one one of the number one most important things in terms of relationships of any kind. I sort of implemented something a couple of years ago where I said to myself, I'm going to authentically and openly communicate with every person in my life, you know, and very mindfully communicate as well, you know, because we can communicate and start saying, oh, you did this and you did that, and, you know, blaming people and, you know, unleashing our emotions onto others. Or we can learn to, what I like to call, consciously communicate and sit down with other people and say, you know, hey, when this happened, this is how I was feeling. I'm just letting you know, these are my emotions that are coming up right now. This is what's going on for me. How are you feeling about this situation? What are your thoughts on this situation? And just having that conversation with another person is just amazing. So many problems that occur right now within relationship dynamics is because of this fear, this inability to, or even just the fact that most people don't really understand how to communicate in this manner, you know, because nobody is really taught how to communicate in that way. And opening up that, yeah, that clear communication with another person can just really, really have a great impact on all relationships in our life.
That's amazing. And I think that, you know, what you just described there, Flavia, was this idea of like brutal honesty versus radical honesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like word vomit, like, hey, let me just tell you everything that's on my mind, right? Rather than, okay, possibly vent to you right now. And you're like setting up that space where you can
Mm-hmm.
that go. And yeah, it's all communication. I think life is communication. Our words create our worlds, right, in a sense. So they're magic spells. That's why we call it spelling, you know. And
Yeah, I love that one.
so definitely, like, I have this idea about relationship that I just got to download this morning about it because I was going to record a video on this topic. But and I don't mean this in any sense of, you know, objectification or anything like that, but I was thinking of like relationships like books, right? In a sense of like, okay, you could like a book, but some people also, they don't know how to read, meaning they don't know how to thrive in a relationship. Some people, they kind of like reading, but they prefer movies or whatever, like, you know, they're kind of like, yeah, I'm not really a book person, right? So they're kind of like, I'm not a relationship person. And and then there's certain people that are bookworms. They like love books. They like read all the books. You know, I love relationships. I love being right. And then there is that one book that you really love that you can't put away, and it always guides you, right? And that's that monogamous, I guess, one-to-one like spark that's there, like a high school love or something. But then there's like, right? So I was just thinking about this idea in terms of relationships being like a book. And you know, some people can't get past the first chapter with someone, or they can't go past chapter 5 or something like that. So but in any case, you got the golden nuggets from that book that you read, you know what I mean? It's like still got the pieces of wisdom that you needed in order for you to grow. So what do you think of this analogy that I just came up with? I mean, you know what
It definitely resonates. So I feel like, you know, there's that saying, obviously, you can't judge a book by its cover. So I think humans, when you use that analogy of a book and a human is like a book, well, yeah, in so many ways it is, you know, you've got the cover, which you often can't judge because, you know, appearances are quite deceiving in some ways and don't really reveal a lot about a person in other ways. But usually you get a feeling, you know, you pick up a book and you're like, oh, I want to read this, you know? We all have this inclination to a particular book for whatever reason that it is. And sometimes, you know, we're walking past, and I know this has happened in a bookshop, and I just like my eyes directly go to a book and I'm like, I need to read this book. I don't know why. And I kind of feel like that the same thing happens with me and people. Like I'll scan a room and I'll say, okay, like I need to speak to this person. I'm not sure why, but I know, yeah, I know there's something in there. I know there's something I can get out of this book. I can learn. I can, you know, enjoy whatever it may be. And I feel that's definitely Definitely an interesting analogy. Haven't heard that one, but I like it.
Awesome. Resonates. Yeah, you know, and in sense of communication, what you were mentioning earlier, you know, I've been working on this communication element, and I learned from different mentors about how to communicate clearly. And I think it's an area that's very overlooked by a lot of people, right? They don't really look at how to clearly communicate and things like that. But I like the fact that you mentioned that, you're communicating through your words and writing things down, because I think that for a lot of people, when they're seeing it on the page, it's like, it's right there where you can't hide from it anymore. It's not this vague, fuzzy thing in your mind, but it's actually text, right? That you can
Mm-hmm.
do. One of my affirmations is I speak my inner truth, which has been really working well for me in the past month or so. Like I'm more able to like take off any random filters or ideas or preconceptions that I have and just allow myself to kind of embrace and enjoy and cherish and savor the moment for what it is, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, do you have any little affirmations or things that you tell yourself that keep you on track or keep you in your flow code?
Mm. The big one that had the largest impact on me recently, within the last, I'd say, yeah, 6 months to a year, was I'm connected to my highest self. I'm connected to my highest purpose. And as soon as I started saying that, it was like, boom, anything that wasn't in alignment started dropping out. Anything that was in my alignment just got amplified to the max. And I see it as, we have, this is my belief anyways, we have so many timelines. There's so many options for us. As a human, we have free will, we have choice. We can choose particular paths, particular timelines. So in order to gain access to a particular timeline, which is going to be, fulfill with the most fulfillment, with the most joy, with the most love, saying that affirmation, I'm connected to my highest purpose, I'm connected to my higher self, will align us with that timeline, because so often we can easily get thrown off from that. And I know throughout my life, I've uh, at one stage of my life often followed other people's paths. And I think that's true for so many people, is we get so influenced by our families or our partners or our friends, societal pressures of what it is to be successful, what it is to be happy. So we've got this, this roadmap almost, and we're reading it and we're going, okay, what direction do I go? And the map's saying go this direction. So we're jumping on that timeline, but something feels a bit off and we're like, this doesn't seem like the right timeline for me. It definitely exists. You're definitely on a timeline, but is that your highest timeline? Is that aligned with your highest self? Or is that simply the timeline you've jumped on because of societal pressures and, influence from your exterior environment? So it's, instead of reading that map that somebody else has given you, you sink in within yourself and you find that inner map, that inner course, that inner guide that's going to take you on the timeline that aligns with, that higher vibration, that higher path.
That's actually perfect, because this is what my program at the end of this month is going to be about, is about hopping timelines, and you just explained it so perfectly.
There you go.
Things that's such a synchronicity. I want to say this, Flavia, is I have on my ceiling of the words higher self evolved. So whenever I wake up, that's the first thing that I see.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great just confirmation of the fact that, we need to remind ourselves that, hey, our higher self is close by. It's in access to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Allow and give ourselves permission to tap into this energy.
Yeah.
Definitely. Awesome. So my final question, I asked this to all the audience members and as well as the podcast people who come on, is if you had a universal megaphone that you could, yell one message and across, the whole universe, what would you say to the planet?
Oh, damn. That's hard. I think for the time that we're in right now, the biggest message I'd have to people is, the question of, are you choosing love or fear? And in each step you take, what would happen if you started to choose love? When you wake up in the morning, when you interact with your family, when you interact with your friends, when you interact with strangers, what would happen if you chose love instead of fear? What would happen if you looked in the mirror and instead of putting yourself down or, doubting yourself and having thoughts of fear come through, what happens if you started to choose thoughts of love and looked at yourself through the lens of love? And I think that can be really transformational for a lot of people, is to, view things through the lens of love and embody that completely within themselves.
Powerful. Thank you so much for sharing and being here, being so present with all of us. May the flow be with you, and may you never be the same again.
You also, thank you.
If you enjoyed this Flow Awakening episode, be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow at Flozone Academy on Instagram. That's at FLOZONEACADEMY. May the flow be with you and stay legendary. Until next time, Flomies.